Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. Well, last week we were fortunate to have Boston University economics professor Lawrence Kotlikoff with us. He told us what many on this show, many people, guests on this show as well as listeners of this show, already believe, and that is that the fiscal situation in the United States government is far worse than what we are being told. So while I believe that is true, I believe that is true, I have believed that's true, and to have a person like Dr. Kotlikoff with his stature say it and say it so boldly, in fact, that the two administrations before the current one have been fibbing to the American people about our fiscal situation, I think is quite remarkable. What we did not get into last week, and the reason I wanted to have Professor Kotlikoff back this week, was to not only to rehash the problems, which are all too familiar with people that listen to this show on a regular basis, perhaps, but to find out what some of the things we can do about them are. What can we do from a policy perspective? What can we do as individuals to protect ourselves against the carnage that may lie ahead of us if changes are not made? Professor Kotlikoff is professor of economics at Boston University. As I said, he's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and of the Econometric Society, a research associate in National Bureau of Economic Research, and president of the Economic Security Planning, Inc. Professor Kotlikoff received his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Pennsylvania in 1973 and his PhD in economics from Harvard University in 1977. From 1977 through 1983, he served on the faculties of economics of the University of California, Los Angeles, and Yale University. In 1981-82, Professor Kotlikoff was a senior economist with the President's Council of Economic Advisors. He has also served as a consultant to the IMF, the World Bank, the Harvard Institute for International Development, as well as other organizations. Professor Kotlikoff is also the author or co-author of 14 books and hundreds of professional journal articles. His most recent book is Jimmy Stewart is Dead. Professor Kotlikoff, welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times.
It's great pleasure to be with you.
It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you so much for coming back. I know you're an extremely busy fellow, and for the sake of listeners who may not have heard you last week, let's just, or maybe have seen you on Bloomberg, and I have a hard time believing most of our listeners haven't seen you sometime or another, but last week we talked a little bit about the work of the IMF and what they had to say about the U.S. fiscal situation, and you said buried in their report was some very revealing numbers. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about what the IMF was saying, quietly saying perhaps, in their annual review of U.S. economic policy?
Yeah, nobody likes to deliver bad news, and but the reality is that governments and international organizations have been misleading, if not lying, to the general public about the severity of long-term fiscal problems. And the IMF did a review, its annual review of the U.S. fiscal condition, and they do some bland words in the summary, but if you dig deep into the report, you find that they're saying that there's a fiscal gap that's enormous and would require essentially a doubling of all taxes in the country immediately and permanently. That's to say all FICA taxes, income taxes, personal income taxes, corporate income taxes, estate and gift taxes. Every tax would have to be doubled in order to cover this fiscal gap. And the fiscal gap is the difference in present value. We say is we refer to the present value as the value in the present, the value right now, of all the future spending obligations, including paying for the official debt, servicing that debt, less all the revenues that's projected. So if you had all the money you're going to have to spend in the future, if you could pay it off right now, and you had all the taxes you're going to collect in the future, and you had those right now in your pocket, you had the same value, the equivalent value, the difference is about $202 trillion. So we have an enormous fiscal gap that's just miles larger than the unofficial debt. So what we've been doing is been focusing on the official debt, which is about $9 trillion, and missing all the unofficial debt to cover Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense spending into the future, and other expenditures. And we're basically screwed because we are in such a deep fiscal water here that we need to fix things immediately and permanently.
Okay, let me just try to put this in some kind of perspective because I think I might have mentioned last week my wife and I live in New York City. We have a fairly high state and city tax on top of the federal tax. You know, I think that we're looking at something approaching all in 50%, slightly less than that perhaps. Are you saying that we might have to double that tax, in other words, pay maybe 90% of our income in taxes in order to make this thing work?
Well, you're probably not paying 50% on average. You're probably paying at the margin, maybe a marginal rate of 50%. But I bet your average tax rate is probably around 25, 30%.
Okay.
So we're talking about making that more like 50, 60%.
Mm-hmm.
For you and every other American, that would have to double unless we can get the spending under control that has been rising at a credible rate over the last 6 decades, really, and is scheduled to continue to rise. So we can't really deal with this problem on the tax side. You can never raise taxes high enough to cover the kind of spending explosion that we've been engaged in. Just as an example, Medicare benefits and Medicaid benefits per beneficiary have grown since 1970. The annual growth rate has been 3 percentage points higher than the growth rate in per capita GDP. So this is, adjusted for inflation. We're talking about Medicare and Medicaid benefit levels growing at 5% each year, year after year on average for 40 years, versus the economy growing per capita terms, growing at 2% per year. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't take anything more than a little high school algebra to understand that this is a prescription for bankruptcy. And we've set these levels of benefits so high, and we have 78 million baby boomers arriving to collect these very high benefit levels, that you start to understand why our fiscal gap can be so large. When the baby boomers are fully retired in about 20 years, they're going to be receiving benefits per person that exceed per capita GDP. It'll be about 110% of GDP. The total annual benefit payments for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid out in the year like 2025 will be something in the order of about $4 trillion measured in today's dollars. So we have a big problem coming. The demographics are very significant. Even though we're going to be relatively young compared to other countries, we're still going to have enough people over 100 to fill up all of Washington, D.C. We're going to have enough people 85 and older to fill up Los Angeles and Chicago and Washington. So we have a lot of very old people, and they're very expensive, the way we've set things up.
Yes, you wonder where the resources are going to come from to pay for that. As a person who's not getting, I'm not retired yet. I'm working full time. I'm not getting a lot of transfer payments from the government. So, from my perspective, my selfish perspective, I would like to see spending cut more than taxes increase to solve this problem. But yet, when we look at our current economic situation, it's been the stimulus, the government spending, that seems to have breathed, at least temporarily, some life back into the economy. Either of these remedies is going to be very, very difficult, especially at this point in time, given our current economic situation, is it not?
Well, I think the best we can do, a lot of the problem here is psychological. We have the same buildings and people we had back in 2007. We're just not coordinating the use of these resources to produce output. And so fundamentally, it's a coordination problem. It's not too little spending or too high a set of taxes. We've got demand-siders on one side saying just spend more, and we've got supply-siders on the other side saying cut taxes. And neither of these prescriptions are really the right answer. We really need just to psych up the economy and the public that America's back to work and is going to succeed in the future. And this requires more than a pep talk. It requires changing some things that are fundamentally broken. Our financial system is fundamentally broken. It's fundamentally corrupt, and 2,000-page Dodd-Frank bill hasn't changed that at all. It hasn't really brought transparency and disclosure to the system. It's just really added more bureaucrats and hasn't changed anything fundamental. Mm-hmm. In my book, I discuss how to fix the financial system as well as describe the mess that is our financial system and how we got into the trouble we got into. We can fix our tax system fundamentally, which is just a terrible situation. Our tax system is just a disgrace. 17,000 pages of IRS code. You've got taxes within taxes within taxes in the personal income tax. Social Security system's got 2,728 rules that nobody could possibly understand without spending a lifetime studying the system and then calling the actuaries at Social Security to find out what the truth is.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's thousands of rules in their program operating manual system to explain those 2,728 rules. And then you've got a healthcare system that is very bureaucratic and is out of control with its spending. It's got no spending caps. And we've just added another federal program, this health exchange program. So we need to keep it simple, stupid. We need to have a new party called the KISS Party. It's called Keep It Simple, Stupid. And there are simple, straightforward solutions that both Republicans and Democrats can agree to, I believe, that can take us forward. But we're not getting anywhere with this economics team because they're very political. The economists that go down to Washington turn instantly into politicians. And they offer the third best solution rather than the first best because immediately they say, well, the first best is not politically feasible. Well, this is like a heart surgeon saying to a patient who needs a heart transplant, you know what, I understand it's going to cause you some pain and you may die, therefore I'm not going to do a heart surgery. I'm just going to put a Band-Aid and hope for the best.